The memory never faded. 10 years had passed, and still Damien Thornwood could see it as clearly as the moment it happened. The autumn leaves falling like drops of blood against the moonlit sky, the scent of pine and wood smoke drifting through the estate, the sound of the orchestra playing in the grand ballroom, while outside, in the shadows of the garden, his father drew his last breath. He had been 22 years old, young enough to believe that his family name meant something, that the Thornwood pack, one of the oldest and most powerful werewolf dynasties on the West Coast, could not be touched by ordinary violence, that his father, the great Alexander Thornwood, was immortal. That night had taught him otherwise. Damien had stepped out of the ballroom to clear his head. The annual autumn masquerade was in full swing, hundreds of guests from allied packs mingling beneath crystal chandeliers, their masks glittering like stars in the candlelight. He had needed air. The weight of expectation, of being the eldest son and future alpha, had pressed down on him like a physical force. He found his father in the garden. Alexander stood alone near the stone fountain, his silver mask pushed up onto his forehead, his eyes fixed on something in the darkness beyond the hedgerow. Damien opened his mouth to speak. The arrow came from nowhere, silent, deadly. It struck his father in the chest with a sound Damien would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. A wet thud, a gasp of surprise, and then Alexander Thornwood, alpha of the most powerful pack in 3 states, crumpled to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Time seemed to fracture into disconnected moments, the flutter of leaves in the night breeze, the distant music from the ballroom, a waltz that would forever after make Damien's stomach turn, the spreading pool of darkness beneath his father's body. Damien caught him before he hit the stone. His father's blood soaked through his white dress shirt, warm and impossibly red in the moonlight. The smell of it filled his nostrils, metallic and wrong, mixed with the scent of autumn flowers and expensive cologne. Alexander's eyes found his son's face, and in them Damien saw something he had never witnessed before. Fear. Not for himself. The great alpha had never feared death. No, this was fear for what he was leaving behind, for the sons who were not yet ready to face the darkness that hunted them, for the pack that would need to survive without his guidance. The words came in fragments, broken by pain and the terrible knowledge of approaching death. Protect the bloodline. Trust no one outside the bond. The enemy wears the face of a friend. Then his father was gone, and Damien was alone in the garden with a corpse, and a rage so vast it threatened to consume him entirely. He had searched for the assassin, shifted into his wolf form, and torn through the forest surrounding the estate, his brother Lucian at his side, both of them howling their grief to the uncaring moon. They found nothing. The killer had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the faint scent of something foreign, something wrong. Their mother died 1 year later. The doctors called it cancer, and perhaps they were right. But Damien knew the truth. Margaret Thornwood had been bonded to her mate for 30 years. When Alexander died, something inside her simply stopped. The will to live drained out of her like water from a cracked vessel, and all the medicine in the world could not put it back. Damien and Lucian buried her beside their father in the family cemetery, beneath the ancient oak that had watched over generations of Thornwood dead. They stood side by side in the rain, 2 young men suddenly alone in a world that had once felt so certain. That night they made a pact. They would find their father's killer. They would rebuild the pack stronger than before, and they would never let themselves be vulnerable again. 10 years had passed since then. 10 years of building, planning, hunting for answers that seemed to slip away like sand through their fingers. The Thornwood Pack was now the most powerful organization on the West Coast, their influence stretching from Seattle to San Diego. Damien ran the financial empire that funded their operations, a network of investment firms and real estate holdings worth billions. Lucian handled security, building an army of loyal wolves who would die before letting any threat reach their alpha. But the killer remained a ghost. Every lead ended in a dead end, every promising thread unraveled into nothing. And the rage that had been born in that garden continued to burn in Damien's chest, never dimming, never cooling. Tonight was the 10th anniversary of the autumn masquerade, the 10th anniversary of his father's murder. Damien stood at the window of his penthouse office, looking out at the city lights scattered below like fallen stars, and felt the familiar weight of memory pressing down on his shoulders. He sensed his brother before he heard him. The bond between them, forged in the womb and strengthened by shared grief, allowed them to feel each other's presence across great distances. Lucian entered the room without knocking, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. "Your wolf is restless." Damien did not turn around. He could see his brother's reflection in the window glass, a mirror image of himself, but somehow different. They were identical in every physical way. Same dark hair, same sharp jawline, same eyes the color of winter storm clouds. But where Damien had learned to contain his emotions behind a mask of cold calculation, Lucian wore his closer to the surface. His wolf was always present in his eyes, always watching, always ready. The anniversary affects us both. Lucian came to stand beside him, his gaze following his brother's to the city below. 10 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like 100 lifetimes ago. "Have you found anything new?" Damien shook his head. The investigation had gone cold years ago. Whoever killed Alexander Thornwood had covered their tracks with a precision that spoke of professional planning. This was not a crime of passion. It was an execution, carried out by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "The masquerade begins in 2 hours. Lucian's voice was neutral, but Damien heard the question beneath the statement. "I know, we must attend. The Allied Pacts expect us to host, as our father did before us. Perhaps this year will be different." Damien finally turned to face his brother. "Different how?" Lucian's expression shifted. Something between uncertainty and anticipation. "I have been feeling strange all day. My wolf is agitated, but not in a threatening way. It is more like anticipation, like something is coming." Damien considered this. He had learned to trust his brother's instincts over the years. Lucian's connection to his wolf was stronger than his own, more primal, less controlled. When Lucian sensed something, it was wise to pay attention. "Then we will watch carefully, as we always do." They dressed for the masquerade in silence. Custom-tailored suits of charcoal gray, identical in cut and color. Masks of deep blue with silver threading, a tribute to their family colors. They moved in perfect synchronization, two halves of a single whole, as they had their entire lives. The Thornwood estate sprawled across 500 acres of prime real estate just outside the city. The main house was a testament to old money and older power, 3 stories of stone and timber that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Tonight it blazed with light, every window glowing against the darkness, the grounds transformed into a wonderland of autumn splendor. Guests had been arriving for the past hour. Alphas from Allied Pacts, their mates and advisors, wealthy humans who served as contacts in the normal world. All of them wore masks, as tradition demanded. All of them played the game of politics and power that kept the werewolf world running smoothly beneath the surface of human civilization. Damien moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, his mask firmly in place in more ways than one. He was the perfect host, charming and attentive, revealing nothing of the turmoil that churned beneath his calm exterior. Lucian circulated separately, his attention split between the social requirements of the evening and the security concerns that never fully left his mind. His wolves were positioned throughout the estate, watching, waiting, ready to respond to any threat. The night wore on. The orchestra played waltzes and contemporary pieces with equal skill. The champagne flowed freely. And slowly, imperceptibly, the restlessness that had plagued both brothers all day began to intensify. It happened at precisely 11:17. Damien would remember the time because he had just glanced at his watch, wondering how much longer he needed to maintain his facade of hospitality before he could retreat to the privacy of his office. A scent reached him through the crowd. Jasmine, something deeper, older, harder to identify. A fragrance that bypassed his conscious mind entirely and spoke directly to his wolf. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced in his 32 years of life. It was not simply attraction, though attraction was certainly part of it. It was recognition, as if some part of him that had been sleeping suddenly awakened and oriented itself toward a new North Star. He stopped mid-sentence, his conversation with a banking associate forgotten. His head turned, his nostrils flaring, every sense suddenly focused with laser intensity. The ballroom seemed to fade around him. The music became distant. The press of bodies, the glitter of masks, The hum of 100 conversations all receded to background noise. There was only the scent, only the pull. Across the ballroom, he saw Lucian freeze in exactly the same posture. His brother stood near the orchestra platform, a champagne flute forgotten in his hand. His body had gone rigid, his shoulders squared, his head tilted at exactly the angle that indicated his wolf had taken notice of something important. Their eyes met across the crowded room. In that single glance, they communicated everything. "You smell it too." "Yes." "What is it? I do not know. Find it now." They began to move through the crowd, drawn by an invisible thread toward the source of that impossible scent. The sea of masked faces parted before them, responding instinctively to the predatory energy that now radiated from both alphas. She stood near the refreshment table, a glass of champagne in her hand, her attention apparently fixed on the orchestra. Her mask was silver and black, covering the upper half of her face, but leaving visible a jaw that could have been carved from marble and lips the color of crushed roses. Her gown was the gray of storm clouds before lightning, simple in cut but expensive in fabric, clinging to a figure that managed to be both elegant and powerful. She was not tall, but she held herself like a woman who had never been made to feel small. And she was an Omega. Damien could sense it now, the particular frequency of her energy signature that marked her as such. But there was something wrong, something that did not fit the standard profile. Omegas radiated their pheromones constantly. It was part of their biology, as natural as breathing. The scent varied in intensity based on their emotional state and their heat cycle, but it was always present, always detectable. This woman had been in the ballroom for at least an hour. Damien was certain of it. He had walked past this very spot multiple times during the evening, and yet he had noticed nothing, sensed nothing, until now. It was as if she had been invisible and suddenly chosen to reveal herself. Lucian appeared at his side. His brother's breathing was slightly elevated, his pupils dilated, signs that his wolf was pressing against the surface, demanding attention. "Damien!" His brother's voice was barely above a whisper. "What is she?" "I do not know, but we are going to find out." They approached her together, moving as a unit, and Damien watched her reaction with careful attention. Most people became nervous when both Thornwood twins focused on them simultaneously. Their combined presence could be overwhelming, even for other alphas. She simply raised her champagne glass and took a measured sip, her eyes traveling from one brother to the other, with an assessment that felt more like evaluation than intimidation. "The evening has been remarkably well organized." Her voice was low and clear, carrying undertones that made something in Damien's chest tighten unexpectedly. Though I confess I had expected more excitement from the legendary Thornwood masquerade, he heard the challenge beneath the pleasant words, recognized it for what it was, a test. Excitement has a way of finding those who seek it. He kept his own voice neutral, controlled. Though I find myself curious about guests who seem to appear out of thin air. Her lips curved slightly, a smile that revealed nothing. "Appear? I have been here since 9 o'clock. Perhaps you simply were not paying attention." "I pay attention to everything in my territory." "Do you?" Her eyes met his directly, and Damien felt a jolt of connection that was almost physical. "Then you should already know who I am. Seraphina Aldridge." Lucian spoke for the first time, his voice rough with barely contained intensity. "Daughter of Marcus Aldridge, former beta of the Cascade Pack before its dissolution, currently unaffiliated." Her attention shifted to Lucian, and Damien watched her expression for any sign of surprise at his brother's knowledge. He saw none, only that same measuring assessment. "You have done your research. We make it a point to know everyone who enters our territory, and yet you did not notice me until just now." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, and the implications beneath it made Damien's wolf stir with something between unease and fascination. "How did you do it?" He asked the question directly, abandoning the verbal fencing that usually characterized these interactions. "How did you mask your presence?" For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect for his directness. "I did not realize I was doing anything unusual. My control has always been stronger than most." Control. The word did not begin to cover what she was demonstrating. The ability to suppress Omega pheromones was rare, but not unheard of. The ability to do so completely, to the point of being invisible to alpha senses, was supposed to be impossible. Unless Damien felt pieces clicking together in his mind, fragments of old stories, legends his father had told him as a child. tales of bloodlines that had supposedly died out centuries ago. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form the words, a new presence imposed itself on their conversation. "Damien? Lucian? I did not expect to find you monopolizing the most interesting guest at your own party." The voice sent ice down Damien's spine. He turned, keeping his expression carefully blank, and faced the man who had just joined them. Lord Aldrich Vane was 58 years old, though he looked a decade younger. His silver hair was swept back from a face that had once been handsome and was now merely distinguished. His eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and they held the kind of calculation that came from decades of political maneuvering. He had been one of Alexander Thornwood's closest allies, had stood as witness at the ceremony that confirmed Damien and Lucian as joint alphas after their father's death, had offered condolences and support during the dark days that followed. Damien had never trusted him. "Lord Vane." The words came out perfectly cordial, perfectly appropriate. "We did not realize you would be attending this year. Your response to our invitation was unexpectedly vague." Vane's smile did not reach his eyes. "I wanted to surprise you. And I must say I am glad I came. It has been far too long since I have seen such a fascinating specimen." His attention shifted to Seraphina, and Damien watched the older alpha's expression change. The political mask slipped slightly, revealing something hungrier beneath. "Miss Aldridge, your reputation does not do you justice. I had heard rumors of an Aldridge Omega with unusual abilities, but I dismissed them as exaggeration. I see now that I was mistaken." Seraphina's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Damien caught it only because he was watching her so closely. A subtle stiffening, a withdrawal that had nothing to do with physical movement. "Lord Vane." She inclined her head politely, but her voice had cooled by several degrees. "I am afraid you have me at a disadvantage. My reputation seems to precede me, while I know very little about you." Something flickered in Vane's eyes, annoyance quickly suppressed. "I am the Alpha of the Eastern Pack, perhaps the second most powerful organization in this region." He gestured expansively. "After our gracious hosts, of course." The phrasing was interesting. The second most powerful. Not an ally or friend of Thornwood, a competitor, a rival waiting for his moment. Damien filed the observation away for later analysis. "Miss Aldridge came alone this evening." Lucian's voice cut through the conversation with deliberate directness. Perhaps she would prefer not to be overwhelmed by so much attention at once. It was not subtle. It was not diplomatic. It was exactly what Damien would have expected from his brother, and he found himself grateful for Lucian's bluntness. Vane's smile tightened. "Of course. I would not dream of intruding on your hospitality." He turned to Seraphina one last time. "I do hope we will have a chance to continue this conversation later, Miss Aldridge. I believe we have much to discuss." He withdrew into the crowd, but Damien noticed that he did not go far. The older alpha positioned himself near a group of his own associates, his attention still fixed on their small gathering, with an intensity that made Damien's wolf growl in warning. "He wants something." Lucian spoke quietly, pitching his voice so that only Damien and Seraphina could hear. "He looks at her like she is a prize to be won." Seraphina set down her champagne glass with careful precision. "Your assessment of Lord Vane is admirably perceptive, and almost certainly correct. You know him?" "I know of him. My father mentioned his name once or twice, never favorably." Damien felt his attention sharpen. Marcus Aldridge had been a beta of considerable reputation before the Cascade Pact dissolved in the territorial wars of 15 years ago. If he had opinions about Vane, they were worth hearing. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private." He gestured toward a doorway that led to the residential wing of the estate. "The library has excellent soundproofing and even better whiskey." Seraphina studied him for a long moment. Her eyes, visible through the cutouts of her mask, were the deep amber color of aged honey. They held an intelligence that seemed to see straight through his social mask to the calculating mind beneath. "You want something too." The observation was matter-of-fact without accusation. "Everyone here tonight wants something from me. The only question is what, and whether I am willing to provide it." "We want answers." Damien matched her directness. "You are not a typical Omega. Your abilities are not typical. And your appearance at this particular event, on this particular night, feels like something more than coincidence. If we are going to be accused of wanting something, then yes. We want to understand who you are and why you are here." She considered this for several heartbeats. Then something in her expression shifted. Not softening exactly, more like a decision reached. "Very well, lead the way." They moved through the estate in silence, leaving the noise and glitter of the masquerade behind. The library occupied the east wing of the second floor, a vast room lined with books that spanned centuries of werewolf history and human literature. A fire burned low in the massive stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across Persian rugs and leather furniture. Damien closed the doors behind them and engaged the lock, not to trap their guest, but to ensure they would not be disturbed. Lucian moved to the sideboard and poured 3 glasses of whiskey without asking. He handed one to Serafina, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. "You asked how I masked my presence." She swirled the amber liquid thoughtfully, watching the firelight play through it. "The truth is, I do not entirely know. The ability has always been there, for as long as I can remember. My mother had it too. She called it the old gift." "The old gift." Damien repeated the phrase carefully. "That is a term I have not heard in many years. I would not expect you to have heard it at all. It died with my mother's generation, or so I thought." Damien exchanged a glance with his brother. The same thought was clearly occurring to both of them. "There are legends," he said slowly. "Stories our father told us when we were children, about Omega bloodlines from the founding era, before the pack scattered and the old knowledge was lost." Serafina's expression remained carefully neutral. "What kind of legends?" "They called them the Silverborn." Lucian set down his whiskey glass and moved closer to the fire, his silhouette casting long shadows across the walls of books, Omegas of such pure lineage that they carried abilities beyond normal biology. The power to mask their presence, the power to amplify the strength of their bonded alphas, the power to heal wounds that would kill ordinary wolves. Damien watched Serafina's reaction carefully. Her expression remained neutral, but he caught the slight tensing of her fingers around the whiskey glass, the almost imperceptible quickening of her pulse visible at her throat. The legends were considered fairy tales by most modern wolves, stories to tell children, nothing more. But Alexander Thornwood had believed them. He had spent years researching the old bloodlines, trying to trace the genealogies that might lead to surviving Silverborn descendants. He never found proof, or if he did, he never shared it with his sons. But now, looking at this woman who could hide her very existence from alpha senses, Damien wondered if his father had been closer to the truth than anyone realized. Serafina was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before, carrying notes of old grief and older memory. "My mother never used that name, but she told me things about our family, about what we could do if we chose to embrace it. She also told me to hide, to never let anyone know what I was capable of." "Why?" "Because people like Lord Vane would hunt me." She met Damien's eyes directly. "Because the power I carry is not just a gift, it is a weapon, and there are those who would do anything to possess it." The implications of her words settled over the room like a physical weight. Damien felt his understanding of the evening shift dramatically. She had not come here by accident. She had come because she was running from something, or someone. "Vane," he said, "his interest in you is not casual." "No." Her jaw tightened. "He has been searching for someone like me for years. A Silverborn Omega to bond with and use as a power source. With that kind of amplification, he could challenge any alpha on the continent, including us." She did not deny it. The fire crackled in the silence. Outside, the sounds of the masquerade drifted faintly through the walls. Inside, the 3 of them stood at the edge of something that felt inevitable, dangerous, impossible to ignore. "Why come here?" Lucian asked the question that was burning in Damien's mind. "If Vane is hunting you, why walk into a gathering where he might find you?" Serafina smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Because I learned something recently. Something about his past that I thought the Thornwood Alphas might find interesting." She reached into a hidden pocket in her gown and withdrew a small object. A knife, ancient and ornate, its blade darkened with age. Damien recognized it immediately. It had belonged to his father. It was the weapon that killed Alexander Thornwood. Serafina's voice was steady, but her eyes held shadows of old pain. "And I can prove that Aldrich Vane is the one who wielded it." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Damien felt his vision narrow, felt his wolf surge against the boundaries of his control. 10 years. 10 years of searching, of dead ends, of frustrated rage. And now this woman, this impossible Omega, walked into his home and handed him the answer he had been seeking. "How?" The word came out rough, barely human. "How do you know?" "Because my father was there that night. He saw everything. And he has been hiding the truth ever since because Vane threatened to kill me if he ever spoke." The click of the library door opening cut through the moment like a blade. Marcus Aldridge stood in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes fixed on his daughter with an expression of absolute terror. "Seraphina," his voice cracked on her name, "what have you done?" "What you should have done 10 years ago, Father. I told the truth." Marcus Aldridge looked like a man watching his worst nightmare unfold. He stepped into the library, his movements those of someone approaching a bomb that might detonate at any moment. "You do not understand." His voice was barely above a whisper. "If Vane finds out, he already knows." Damien heard his own voice as if from a great distance, cold and hard as iron. "He has been watching her all evening. Whatever protection you thought you were providing by staying silent, it ended the moment she walked through our doors." Marcus flinched as if struck. He turned to his daughter, reaching for her with hands that trembled visibly. "We have to leave, now, before he—" A crash from somewhere below cut off his words. Then another. Then the unmistakable sound of combat. Lucian was already moving, his wolf rising to the surface as he crossed to the window and looked down at the grounds below. "Rogues." His voice held the flat calm of a soldier reporting to his commander. "At least 6 of them. They are heading for the east wing." "For her." Damien understood immediately. Vane is making his move. He turned to Seraphina, expecting to see fear. What he saw instead was a cold, fierce determination that matched his own. "Then we had better not make it easy for him." They descended through the estate like wolves on the hunt. Damien led, his senses extended to their maximum range, tracking the intruders through scent and sound. Lucian brought up the rear, his body positioned to protect both Seraphina and her father. The first rogue alpha burst through a side door just as they reached the ground floor. He was massive, scarred, his eyes wild with the particular madness that came from breaking pack bonds. He launched himself at Damien with claws extended and teeth bared. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Damien caught the attack, redirected it, and opened the rogue's throat with a single, precise strike. The body hit the floor with a wet thud, and Damien was already moving past it before the blood finished spreading. "2 more in the conservatory," Lucian's voice came from behind him. "I will handle them. Get her out." Damien grabbed Seraphina's arm and pulled her toward the back of the estate. She kept pace with him easily, her movements fluid and controlled, showing none of the panic that might be expected from a civilian in combat. Behind them, Lucian's howl echoed through the corridors. It was answered by screams of pain that ended abruptly. The garden door was ahead. Damien could see moonlight through the glass panels. Freedom, escape, safety. A figure stepped out of the shadows and blocked their path. Victor. Damien recognized him from intelligence reports. Vane's personal enforcer, a rogue alpha who had killed more wolves than any other living assassin. He smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "Lord Vane sends his regards." He attacked. Victor was fast, faster than any opponent Damien had faced in years. His strikes came like lightning, forcing Damien to retreat, to defend, to abandon any thought of counterattack. Behind him, Seraphina screamed a warning. Damien twisted, barely avoiding a blow that would have torn out his spine. He felt Victor's claws rake across his ribs, felt the hot rush of blood soaking through his shirt. His vision began to blur. Something wrong. Something in the wound. Poison. Victor's smile widened. "A gift from Lord Vane. Do not worry. You will live long enough to watch what happens next." Damien felt his legs give way. The world tilted sideways as he collapsed against the wall, his body betraying him, the poison spreading through his system like ice. Victor stepped over him, reaching for Seraphina with blood-stained claws. And then light. Silver light, blazing from Seraphina like the birth of a star. It filled the corridor, filled Damien's vision, filled every corner of his consciousness with warmth and power and something that felt impossibly like hope. The light touched him, and the poison in his veins burned away to nothing. His strength returned in a rush, his wounds closing, his wolf surging back to full power with a ferocity that made him roar. Victor had thrown up his arms against the blinding radiance. He stumbled backward, disoriented, vulnerable. Damien did not give him time to recover. When it was over, Victor lay dead on the marble floor, and Seraphina stood trembling in the fading glow of power she had not known she possessed. Damien caught her as her knees buckled. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, her body exhausted by whatever force she had unleashed. Lucian appeared at the end of the corridor, covered in blood that was not his own. His eyes took in the scene in an instant. His brother holding the Omega, the dead assassin, the fading traces of silver light still hanging in the air. "She saved you." Damien looked down at the woman in his arms. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, but her heart beat steady and strong against his chest. "Yes," he heard the weight of something inevitable in his own voice. "She did." Marcus Aldridge emerged from hiding, his face ashen as he stared at his unconscious daughter. "The silver-born power. I did not know it had grown so strong. Neither did she." Damien's arms tightened around Seraphina. But Vane did. He knew exactly what she was capable of. That is why he wanted her. "And now?" Damien met the older man's eyes. "Now she stays with us. Until Vane is dealt with. Until this is over. Until we understand exactly what she is and what she can do." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but something in Damien's expression stopped him. "She will be safe here." Lucian moved to stand beside his brother. "We protect our own. She is not yours." Damien thought of the light that had burned away the poison in his veins, thought of the connection he had felt in that moment, something deeper than words, older than conscious thought. "Not yet," he said quietly, "but I think she will be." The aftermath of battle settled over the estate like a shroud. Damien carried Seraphina through corridors that still smelled of blood and fear, his brother clearing the path ahead, his mind racing through the implications of everything that had just occurred. Vane had planned this. The timing was too precise, the execution too professional. The rogue attackers had known exactly where to breach the estate's defenses, exactly when to strike, exactly who they were hunting. This was not a spontaneous attack. This was the culmination of weeks, perhaps months, of careful preparation. Which meant Vane had known about Seraphina long before tonight, had been tracking her, watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. The thought made Damien's wolf growl with protective rage. Marcus Aldridge followed them at a distance, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, fear for his daughter, guilt for years of silence, and something else that Damien could not quite identify, relief perhaps, the burden of a decade-long secret finally lifted from his shoulders. They would need to talk, soon. Damien needed to know everything Marcus had witnessed on the night of his father's murder. Every detail, no matter how small. But that conversation could wait until Seraphina was safe and Vane's immediate threat was neutralized. The Thornwood security team had already secured the perimeter by the time they reached the main house. Lucian had called them in the moment the first rogue appeared, and now a dozen of their most trusted wolves patrolled the grounds, their senses alert for any sign of renewed attack. It would not come tonight. Damien was certain of that. Vane had made his play and failed. He would retreat now, regroup, plan his next move. That was the way he operated, patient, methodical, never making the same mistake twice. But the failure would cost him. Victor had been his most valuable asset, a killer whose reputation alone was worth a dozen ordinary soldiers. With Victor dead, Vane's options had narrowed considerably. And more importantly, his secret was out. The entire werewolf world would soon know that Aldrich Vane, respected alpha of the Eastern Pack, was the man who had murdered Alexander Thornwood 10 years ago. The political ramifications would be enormous. Alliances would shift. Enemies would become allies. And Vane's carefully constructed empire of influence would begin to crumble. Unless he found a way to silence everyone who knew the truth. They carried Seraphina to the penthouse as dawn broke over the city. The masquerade guests had been evacuated, the rogue bodies disposed of, the damage assessed and repair crews called. The machinery of pack management ground on, efficient and relentless. But in the quiet of the penthouse bedroom, Damien sat beside the sleeping Omega and watched her breathe. His brother stood at the window, a silent sentinel against whatever might come next. "Vane will not stop," Lucian said. "He has revealed his hand. He cannot afford to let her live now. Then we make sure she survives. And after?" Damien did not answer immediately. He was thinking of his father's dying words. "Protect the bloodline. Trust no one outside the bond. The enemy wears the face of a friend." Alexander Thornwood had been warning him about Vane. He was certain of it now. His father had known, or suspected, and the knowledge had gotten him killed. But now Damien had something his father had not. A witness, a weapon, an Omega with power that could change everything. And something else, something he was not yet ready to name, but which pulsed in his chest with every beat of his heart as he watched Seraphina's sleeping face. After he finally answered, "We end this, whatever it takes, however long it takes. We find Vane and we make him pay for every drop of blood he has spilled." Lucian turned from the window. His eyes, when they met his brother's, held the same fire that burned in Damien's soul. Together, always. Outside, the sun continued to rise over the city. Inside, 2 alpha wolves stood guard over an Omega who had already changed their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. The hunt for their father's killer was over. The war for their future was just beginning. 3 days after the attack at the masquerade, Seraphina opened her eyes. She woke to unfamiliar surroundings. A bedroom larger than her entire apartment, decorated in shades of gray and silver. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a cityscape she did not recognize, towers of glass and steel reaching toward a sky heavy with winter clouds. For a long moment she simply lay there, trying to piece together the fragments of memory that swirled through her mind like leaves in a storm. The ballroom, the twins, the attack. And then light, silver light pouring out of her like blood from a wound, burning away everything in its path. She had used the power her mother had warned her never to reveal, the power that had been sleeping inside her for 23 years, waiting for the moment when it would be needed most. And now everyone knew what she was. The door opened, and Lucian Thornwood entered carrying a tray of food. He stopped when he saw her sitting up, his expression shifting from concern to relief in a heartbeat. "You are awake. How long?" 3 days since the masquerade. He set the tray on the bedside table and pulled a chair close to the bed. We were beginning to worry. Seraphina studied him in the gray morning light. He looked different than she remembered from the ballroom, less polished, more human. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and stubble darkened his jaw. He wore simple clothes, a sweater and slacks, nothing like the elegant suit he had worn at the ball. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. "You have been watching over me." It was not a question. Lucian did not deny it. "Damien and I have taken shifts. Your father has been here too, though he does not stay long. I think it is difficult for him to see you like this." My father. The memories crystallized. He was there, at the estate. He finally told you about that night. He told us everything. Lucian's voice hardened slightly. Every detail he witnessed, every threat Vane made to ensure his silence. And now? Now we prepare. Lucian leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Vane will not stop. He failed to capture you at the masquerade, and he lost his best assassin in the attempt. He will be desperate now. Desperate men make mistakes, but they also become more dangerous. Seraphina absorbed this. Her mind was still foggy from 3 days of unconsciousness, but the essential facts were clear enough. She had walked into a war she did not fully understand, and now she was at its center. "Where is Damien?" "In his office. He has been coordinating with our allies, preparing for what comes next." Lucian paused. "He wanted to be here when you woke, but there are things that cannot wait. The pack needs him." "Yes." "Then he is where he should be." Something flickered in Lucian's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. He nodded slowly. "You understand. I understand that leadership is not about what you want. It is about what your people need." Seraphina pushed herself higher against the pillows, ignoring the weakness that still clung to her limbs. "My mother taught me that before she died. She was not an alpha, but she understood power better than most who held it." Lucian was silent for a moment, then he reached out and took her hand. The gesture was simple, almost innocent, but the warmth of his skin against hers sent a current through Seraphina's entire body. She felt something stir in her chest, something that had been dormant for years. The part of her that was Omega, responding to the presence of an alpha whose touch felt inexplicably right. "You saved my brother's life." Lucian's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "The poison Victor used should have killed him in minutes, would have killed him if not for what you did." "I did not know I could do that." The confession came out before she could stop it. "I did not know the power could heal. Neither did we. But my father spoke of such things. He believed the Silverborn could do more than anyone realized. He spent years searching for proof." "And did he find it?" Lucian shook his head. "If he did, he never told us. But I think now that he might have been closer than we knew. There were files in his study that went missing after his death, research that was never recovered." Vane took them. Almost certainly, along with so much else. Serafina let the implications settle into her mind. Vane had killed Alexander Thornwood not just to eliminate a rival, but to steal whatever knowledge the Alpha had gathered about the Silverborn. He had been planning this for more than a decade, playing a long game that was only now reaching its endgame. And she was the final piece he needed. The door opened again, and this time Damien entered. He looked even more exhausted than his brother, his suit wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. But his eyes, when they found hers, held a fierce clarity that cut through the fatigue like a blade. "You are awake, so I have been told." She thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost a smile, almost. "How do you feel?" "Like I slept for 3 days and fought a battle in my dreams." Serafina accepted the cup of water Lucian handed her and took a long drink. "What have I missed?" Damien crossed to the window and stood looking out at the city, his hands clasped behind his back. His posture was rigid, controlled, the stance of a man holding something volatile in check. Vane has gone to ground. His estate is locked down, his communications encrypted. He knows we have Marcus's testimony, and he knows we have the weapon that killed our father. He is preparing for war. Then we should strike now before he is ready. Damien turned to face her. That was my first instinct as well. But there are complications, such as the Pack Alliance. We cannot move against Vane without their sanction, not without risking a wider conflict. There are 7 major packs in this region, and all of them have treaties with both Thornwood and the Eastern Pack. If we attack Vane without following proper protocol, we become the aggressors. We lose allies. We give our enemies an excuse to move against us. So we follow protocol. Yes. Damien's jaw tightened. I have called for an emergency session of the Pack Council. 8 days from now, we will present our evidence and demand that Vane answer for his crimes. And if the Council does not believe you, then we invoke older laws. Lucian spoke from beside the bed, his hand still holding hers. Trial by combat. The ancient right of any Alpha to settle disputes through single combat. Serafina looked from one brother to the other. She saw the same determination in both faces, the same willingness to risk everything for justice, for vengeance, for honor. But she also saw the weight they carried, the burden of leadership, the knowledge that every decision they made could cost lives. She made her own decision in that moment. Then I will stand with you. Whatever comes, whatever the Council decides, I am part of this now. My blood made me a target. Let it make me a weapon instead. The days that followed were the most intense of Serafina's life. She recovered quickly, her strength returning faster than anyone expected. The Silverborn blood in her veins seemed to accelerate her healing, pushing back the exhaustion and weakness that should have lingered for weeks. By the 4th day since the masquerade, she was out of bed. By the 5th, she was training. Lucian taught her to fight. Not the graceful self-defense classes she had taken as a teenager, but real combat, the kind that ended with one person standing and one person dead. They trained in the penthouse gym, a space filled with weights and mats and equipment she did not recognize. The room occupied the entire north wing of the penthouse, with reinforced walls designed to withstand the impact of wolves in full combat. Morning light streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. Lucian moved like water, fluid and relentless, his attacks coming from angles she never anticipated. He had been trained from childhood, he told her. His father had believed that every member of the pack should know how to defend themselves, regardless of their designation. An Omega who could fight was an Omega who could survive. The first day, she spent more time on the ground than on her feet. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her joints ached from impacts she had not learned to absorb, but she refused to show weakness. Again, the command came every time she hit the mat, every time she failed to block, every time her body betrayed her inexperience. Again, she lost count of how many times she fell, how many bruises blossomed across her skin, how many times she wanted to quit, to admit that she was not built for this kind of violence. But she did not quit. She got up every time, and slowly, painfully, she began to improve. Your instincts are good. Lucian circled her, his body relaxed but ready. You read my movements before I make them. That is rare. I can feel where you are going to strike. Serafina wiped sweat from her forehead. It is like a pressure in the air. The Omega gift. Heightened awareness of alpha energy. Most Omegas use it to avoid conflict. You are learning to use it for combat. Is that wrong? Lucian stopped circling. His eyes met hers, and something in his expression softened. "Nothing about you is wrong." She felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away. The attraction between them was becoming harder to ignore. It lived in every accidental touch, every charged glance, every moment when they stood too close and neither stepped back. But there was Damien to consider as well. The bond she felt with Lucian had a twin, an equal pull toward his brother that confused and excited her in equal measure. She had never experienced anything like it, had never imagined that she could feel so strongly for two people at once. The Silverborn legends spoke of twin bonds, alphas born together, destined to share a mate. She had always thought those stories were romantic fantasy. Now she was beginning to wonder if they were prophecy. Damien joined them on the 6th day since the masquerade. He had been consumed by preparations for the council meeting, but he made time in the late afternoon to watch Seraphina train. She felt his presence before she saw him. That strange awareness that seemed to connect them, the invisible thread that drew taut whenever he was near. She turned, expecting to see him in the doorway. He was already on the mat. "Show me what you have learned." His attack came without warning. Faster than Lucian, more economical in his movements, every strike precisely calculated for maximum effect. Seraphina blocked the first blow, dodged the second, and found herself on the mat with his hand at her throat before she could process what had happened. Damien looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "You hesitated. You did not give me time to react. An enemy will not give you time." He released her throat and offered his hand. Again. They sparred for an hour. Damien was relentless, pushing her past her limits, forcing her to find reserves of speed and strength she did not know she possessed. Lucian watched from the sideline, offering occasional corrections, his eyes tracking every movement. By the end, Seraphina was exhausted. Every muscle ached, her lungs burned, but she had landed 3 solid hits on Damien, and the look of approval in his eyes was worth every bruise. "You learn quickly." He handed her a towel. "Most wolves train for years before they can touch me." "Most wolves have not spent their whole lives hiding what they are." Seraphina accepted the towel and pressed it to her face. "I learned to read people, to anticipate threats, to be invisible when I needed to be. Those skills translate." Damien was silent for a moment, then he nodded slowly. "I underestimated you. When we first met, I thought you were running from Vane. I did not realize you were hunting him. I was doing both." Seraphina lowered the towel and met his eyes. "I came to your masquerade because I knew he would be there. I wanted to see what he would do when he saw me, whether he would reveal himself." "A dangerous game." "Yes, but I was tired of waiting, tired of hiding, tired of letting him control my life from the shadows." She paused. "My mother died 3 years ago. Cancer, the doctor said, but I believe Vane had something to do with it. She was getting close to exposing him, and then suddenly she was sick. Too fast, too convenient." Damien's expression hardened. "We will find the truth. About your mother, about our father, about everything Vane has done, and then we will make him pay." On the 7th evening since the masquerade, the 3 of them sat together in the penthouse living room. A fire burned in the massive stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The room was decorated in shades of gray and silver, the colors of the Thornwood pack, with leather furniture arranged in intimate groupings around the hearth. Outside, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the city in white. The windows were frosted at the edges, creating a frame of ice around the glittering lights below. It was beautiful, Seraphina thought. Beautiful and cold, like the world she had entered. Lucian had poured whiskey for all of them, a smoky single malt that warmed her throat on the way down. She could feel the alcohol loosening something inside her, dissolving the walls she had built over years of careful isolation. "Tell me about your father." Seraphina curled into the corner of the leather sofa, a glass warming her hands. "Not the alpha. The man." Damien and Lucian exchanged a glance. Some silent communication passed between them, and then Damien spoke. "He was the best man I have ever known. He built this pack from nothing. When he took over as alpha, Thornwood was a minor power, barely surviving on the margins of pack politics. By the time he died, we controlled half the West Coast. But he never became hard." Lucian picked up the thread seamlessly. He could have. The things he saw, the things he had to do, they could have turned him cold. Instead, he remained kind. He remembered the names of every wolf in the pack. He attended their weddings, their funerals, the births of their children. He made them feel valued. He sounds like a good leader. He was. Damien stared into the fire, his expression distant. But he was also a good father. When our mother got sick, he devoted himself to her care. He could have delegated, could have let others handle it. Instead, he was there every day, holding her hand, telling her stories, making sure she knew she was loved. What happened to her? Cancer. Lucian's voice was soft. It moved fast. By the time they caught it, there was nothing to be done. She lasted 6 months after the diagnosis. I am sorry. Damien shook his head. Do not be sorry. She had a good life, a loving mate, sons she was proud of. When she died, she was at peace. He paused. Our father never recovered. I think that is why Vane was able to get close to him. His guard was down. His will to live was diminished. When the arrow struck, part of him welcomed it. You do not know that. I know my father. Damien finally looked at her, and she saw the grief he carried in the depths of his eyes. Grief and guilt and a rage that burned cold and eternal. He would have fought harder if he had something to fight for. We were not enough. Not after losing her. You were 22. Serafina set down her whiskey and moved closer to him on the sofa. You were children who had just lost their mother. It was not your job to give him a reason to live. It was his job to stay alive for you. The words hung in the air between them. Damien stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. No one has ever said that to me before. Then everyone else has been wrong. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but they curled around hers with surprising gentleness. On her other side, Lucian moved closer. His warmth pressed against her shoulder, his presence a comfort she had not known she needed. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers, 3 people bound together by circumstance and something deeper, something that felt like fate. On the morning of the 8th day since the masquerade, Damien summoned Serafina to his study. The room was lined with books and maps, dominated by a massive desk covered in papers and computer screens. Damien stood behind the desk, his expression grave. I have been researching your bloodline. He gestured to the papers spread before him, following the genealogies back as far as the records allow. And what did you find? He was silent for a moment. Then he turned one of the papers toward her. Your mother's family, the Blackwoods, were thought to be extinct. They were one of the original Silverborn lines, holders of the pure blood that goes back to the founding of the Pax. The last known Blackwood died 200 years ago, or so everyone believed. But my mother survived. Her grandmother survived. Damien pointed to a name on the family tree. Helena Blackwood. She disappeared during the purges, when the other Pax decided the Silverborn were too dangerous to exist. Everyone assumed she was dead. Instead, she went into hiding, changed her name, married into a human family, and passed the blood down through her daughters, generation after generation, waiting for the time when it would be safe to emerge. Serafina stared in the paper, at the names of ancestors she had never known, at the history that had been hidden from her for her entire life. My mother never told me any of this. She may not have known all of it. The knowledge was lost over the generations, diluted along with the blood. But the power remained dormant, waiting for someone strong enough to awaken it. Why me? Why now? Damien moved around the desk to stand beside her. His hand found her shoulder, and the touch sent warmth spreading through her chest. Because the blood recognizes need. It awakens when it is most required. And right now, with Vane threatening everything we have built, it is very much required. He told me I was a weapon. At the masquerade. He said he had been searching for someone like me for years. He has. Damien's grip tightened slightly. The Silverborn can amplify an alpha's power exponentially. If Vane bonded with you, he would become nearly unstoppable. He could challenge any pack on the continent and win. Then why does he not simply take me? He has the resources, the soldiers. Because bonding cannot be forced. Not truly. A coerced bond is weak, unstable. It would give him a fraction of the power he seeks. For the full amplification, he would need your willing participation, which he will never have, which he will never have. Damien agreed, but he is desperate enough to try anyway. That makes him dangerous. Serafina turned to face him. They were close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. There is something else. She had been thinking about this for days, turning it over in her mind, examining it from every angle. The power that saved you from Victor, it came from me, but it also came through me, from somewhere deeper, older. Damien nodded slowly. The Silverborn were not just powerful. They were connected to something. The old texts speak of a wellspring, a source of primal energy that the first wolves drew upon. The Silverborn maintained that connection when everyone else lost it. "Do you believe that?" I did not. He reached up and touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "But I felt what you did. I felt the light move through you. It was not human. It was not wolf. It was something else entirely. I am afraid of it." The confession came out in a whisper. "I am afraid of what I might become." "You will become exactly who you are meant to be." Damien leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "And we will be beside you, whatever happens, whatever you discover. You are not alone anymore." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable. A culmination of days of tension, of glances that lingered too long, of touches that meant more than either of them admitted. His lips were warm and demanding, and she surrendered to them without hesitation. When they finally pulled apart, she was breathless. "Lucian knows." Damien's voice was rough. "We share everything, including this. And he is all right with it?" In answer, the study door opened, and Lucian entered. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled Serafina into his arms, and kissed her with a passion that matched his brother's. When he released her, she stood between them, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. "This is not normal." "No." Lucian smiled, and for once there was no shadow in his eyes. "It is not normal. It is better." The council meeting took place on the 11th day since the masquerade, in a neutral location deep in the mountains, an ancient stone hall that had served as the seat of pack justice for centuries. The building had stood since before the European wolves came to this continent, built by hands long forgotten for purposes that had evolved over generations. Massive pillars of granite supported a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Torches burned in iron brackets along the walls, their flames flickering in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The floor was covered in packed earth, stained dark by the blood of countless trials that had been decided here. Representatives from all 7 major packs attended, their faces grave, their attention focused on the raised platform where accusations would be made and answered. Each pack had sent their alpha and 2 advisors, along with honor guards who stood at attention around the perimeter of the hall. The combined presence of so many powerful wolves created a pressure in the air that was almost physical, a weight that pressed against Serafina's chest with every breath. Damien stood at the center of the platform, dressed in the formal black of a pack alpha making a claim of honor. His posture was rigid, controlled, every line of his body communicating strength and certainty. Lucian flanked him on the right, his expression carefully blank, but his eyes constantly moving, scanning the crowd for threats. Serafina stood on the left, her presence a statement in itself. She wore a gown of silver and gray, the thornwood colors, a deliberate declaration of allegiance. Her hair was pulled back to reveal the graceful line of her neck, unmarked by any bond but full of promise. She could feel eyes upon her from every direction, some curious, some hostile, some calculating the value of what she represented. Lord Vane sat across from them, surrounded by his advisors and guards. He wore an expression of offended dignity, the mask of a man unjustly accused. But Serafina saw the calculation behind his eyes, the cold assessment of a predator sizing up his opponents. Elder Harrington, the most senior member of the council, called the session to order. "We are gathered to hear a grave accusation. The Alpha of Thornwood claims that the Alpha of the Eastern Pack is guilty of murder, conspiracy, and crimes against the peace of our alliance. These are serious charges. They require serious evidence." Damien stepped forward. 10 years ago, my father, Alexander Thornwood, was murdered at the Autumn Masquerade. For a decade, we searched for his killer without success. The assassin had covered his tracks too well. The weapon used had vanished without a trace. He paused, letting the silence build. Until now. Damien produced a velvet-wrapped bundle and opened it to reveal the ancient knife that Serafina had shown him in the library. The blade was dark with age, but the symbols etched into its surface were still visible. Old symbols, pack symbols. "This is the weapon that killed my father." It was recovered by Marcus Aldridge, who witnessed the murder from the garden. He has been silent because the killer threatened his daughter's life. Now he is prepared to testify. Marcus came forward, his face pale but determined. He told his story in a clear voice, describing the night of the masquerade, the figure he had seen in the shadows, the face revealed by moonlight just before the killing blow was struck. It was Aldrich Vane. Marcus pointed at the alpha of the Eastern Pack. He killed Alexander Thornwood. I saw him with my own eyes. The hall erupted in murmurs. Elder Harrington called for silence. This is a serious accusation. Do you have evidence beyond your testimony? Marcus nodded. The knife. When Vane dropped it, I retrieved it and kept it hidden. His blood is on the handle. His fingerprints are embedded in the leather grip. Modern forensics can prove what I have always known. Vane rose to his feet, his expression thunderous. This is absurd, a fabrication designed to weaken my position. The man is clearly lying to protect his daughter, who has been seduced by the Thornwood twins into joining their conspiracy against me. I have not been seduced. Seraphina stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. I came to the Thornwood estate of my own will, seeking justice for my mother, who I believe was killed on your orders. I revealed my nature to draw you out, and you took the bait. Vane's eyes narrowed. Your nature? Yes, let us discuss that. He turned to address the council. This woman is a Silverborn, a bloodline that was declared too dangerous to exist 2 centuries ago. The old laws mandate that such creatures be contained or destroyed. If anyone should be on trial here, it is her. The murmurs grew louder. Seraphina felt the weight of hostile attention pressing against her from all sides. Fear stirred in her chest, but she pushed it down. The old laws were written by those who feared what they did not understand. I am not a creature. I am an omega of pure blood, and I stand with Thornwood by my own choice. Elder Harrington raised his hand for silence. The question of the Silverborn is a separate matter. Today, we address the accusation of murder. He turned to Vane. You have heard the testimony against you. You have seen the evidence presented. How do you answer? Vane straightened to his full height. His expression shifted from outrage to cold calculation. I invoke the right of challenge. The hall went silent. The right of challenge was ancient law, older than the council itself. It allowed any accused alpha to demand single combat in place of trial. The victor would be deemed innocent in the eyes of the packs, regardless of any evidence presented. It was a desperate move, a move that revealed just how strong the case against him truly was. I accept. Damien's voice rang out before anyone else could speak. Name your champion. Vane smiled, and in that smile, Seraphina saw the trap closing. Kane Volkov, step forward. A massive figure emerged from the ranks of Vane's guards. He was even larger than Victor had been, his body covered in scars that spoke of countless battles. His eyes were the yellow of a wolf in full predator mode, and they fixed on Damien with hungry anticipation. The brother of Victor. Vane's voice dripped with satisfaction. He has been waiting a long time to avenge his sibling's death. Now he will have his chance. Seraphina felt ice spread through her veins. Victor had nearly killed Damien with poison and treachery. Kane looked even more dangerous, and he had the added motivation of vengeance. Damien. She grabbed his arm. You cannot do this. Let Lucian fight. Let me find another way. He looked down at her, and she saw no fear in his eyes. Only determination. Only the cold fire of purpose that had burned in him since the night his father died. This is my fight. It has always been my fight. He reached up and touched her face, a gesture of tenderness that seemed out of place in this hall of conflict and accusation. Whatever happens, remember what I told you. You are not alone. You never will be again. He turned and walked toward the combat circle, leaving her standing with Lucian, watching the man they both loved prepare to fight for his life. The hall cleared a space in the center, forming a ring of bodies around the 2 combatants. Damien removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. Kane simply stood waiting, his massive hands flexing at his sides. Elder Harrington spoke the ritual words. This combat will be fought until one yields or dies. No weapons, no interference. Let the judgment of blood determine the truth. He dropped his hand. Kane attacked immediately, a blur of motion that covered the distance between them in a heartbeat. His fist connected with Damien's jaw, snapping his head back, sending him staggering. Seraphina cried out. Lucian's hand closed on her arm, holding her back. Damien recovered, ducked under the next blow, and drove his elbow into Kane's ribs. The giant grunted, but did not slow. He grabbed Damien by the throat and lifted him off the ground. For a terrible moment, Seraphina thought it was over. She watched Damien's feet kick uselessly in the air, watched his face turn red as Kane's fingers crushed his windpipe. Then Damien shifted, The transformation was faster than anything she had seen. One moment he was human, the next he was wolf, a massive black beast that tore free of Kane's grip and landed in a crouch, teeth bared, eyes blazing. Kane shifted as well, becoming a gray wolf that dwarfed even Damien's impressive form. They circled each other, growling, looking for openings. The wolves clashed in a fury of teeth and claws. Blood flew. The sound of impact echoed through the hall. They broke apart, circled, clashed again. Damien was faster, more skilled, but Kane was stronger and seemed immune to pain. Every wound Damien inflicted healed almost immediately. Every advantage he gained was quickly lost. Lucian's grip on Serafina's arm tightened. "Something is wrong." His voice was tight with worry. "Kane should not be healing that fast. No wolf heals that fast." Serafina watched the combat with new eyes. Lucian was right. The wounds she saw Damien inflict were closing within seconds, as if Kane's body was operating on some accelerated timeline. And then she understood. He is being amplified. She felt the truth click into place. Vane has found another Silverborn, a weak one maybe, hidden somewhere nearby, feeding power into Kane. Lucian's face went pale. If that is true, Damien cannot win. On the combat floor, Damien stumbled. Kane's claws raked across his flank, opening deep wounds that did not heal as fast as they should. The black wolf was slowing, weakening, the relentless assault finally taking its toll. Serafina made her decision. She pulled free of Lucian's grip and stepped into the combat circle. The hall erupted in shouts of protest. Elder Harrington called for her to stop, but she ignored them all, walking steadily toward the battling wolves, reaching deep inside herself for the power that had saved Damien once before. She found it waiting. The silver light, the ancient energy that connected her to something vast and eternal. It rose through her like a tide, filling her veins, blazing from her skin in ribbons of radiance. The wolves froze. Kane snarled, his yellow eyes squinting against the brilliance. Damien looked at her, and even in wolf form, she could see the recognition in his gaze. She placed her hand on Damien's head. The light flowed into him, through him, repairing the damage, amplifying his strength, connecting them on a level deeper than words could describe. When she pulled back, he was transformed, larger, more powerful. His eyes blazed with silver fire that matched her own. Kane hesitated for the first time. Fear flickered in his predator gaze. Damien did not give him time to recover. He attacked with speed and fury that shattered the giant wolf's defenses. Teeth found throat, claws found heart. And in a matter of seconds it was over. Kane Volkov lay dead on the stone floor, his massive body already beginning the slow transformation back to human form that death brought to all werewolves. Damien shifted back to human form and stood over the body, breathing hard, his skin still shimmering with traces of silver light. Blood covered his chest and arms, some his own, most belonging to his fallen opponent. He looked like a warrior from ancient times, a hero from the legends his father used to tell. "The judgment of blood has been rendered." His voice carried to every corner of the hall, strong and clear despite his obvious exhaustion. "Aldrich Vane is guilty." The hall erupted in chaos. Some voices shouted approval, others called for order. The representatives from allied packs exchanged glances that ranged from satisfied to worried, each calculating what this verdict would mean for their own positions. Vane's face twisted with rage. The mask of dignified outrage he had maintained throughout the proceedings finally cracked, revealing the monster beneath. His eyes blazed with hatred as he reached for something at his belt, a weapon, a signal device. Serafina could not tell. He never completed the motion. Lucian was there, moving faster than human eyes could follow, his hand closing on Vane's wrist and twisting until bone cracked. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent hall, a punctuation mark to end the drama that had unfolded. "It is over!" Lucian's voice was ice. "You lost." Vane's guards moved forward, but stopped when they saw the wolves of Thornwood closing ranks around them. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and their alpha had just been defeated in honorable combat. There was nothing more they could do. Elder Harrington stepped forward, his expression grave. The old wolf had presided over countless trials in this hall, had seen alphas rise and fall, had witnessed the full spectrum of pack justice. But even he seemed affected by what had just occurred. "Aldrich Vane, by the judgment of combat and the evidence presented, you are found guilty of murder and conspiracy. The punishment is death or exile. Choose." Vane looked around the hall. His allies had stepped back. His guards had lowered their weapons. He stood alone, an old man whose ambitions had finally outpaced his abilities. Exile. The word came out like a curse. I choose exile. Then you will leave these territories within 3 days. If you are ever seen within our borders again, your life is forfeit. Vane pulled free of Lucian's grip and straightened his coat. His eyes found Seraphina's, and the hatred in them was pure and absolute. This is not over. He spoke softly, so only she could hear. The Silverborn were hunted to extinction once. It can happen again. He turned and walked out of the hall, his guards falling in behind him. Seraphina watched him go, and despite the victory, she felt the weight of his words settling into her bones. This was not the end. It was merely a pause. But for now, she turned to face the 2 men who had changed her life. Damien and Lucian stood together, battered but triumphant, their eyes finding hers across the blood-stained floor. She walked toward them, and they opened their arms to receive her. Yet even as they held her, even as the pack celebrated around them, Seraphina could not shake the feeling that Vane's exile was too easy, too clean. A man who had spent decades building power, who had murdered and manipulated without remorse, would not simply walk away. Somewhere in the winter forest beyond the hall, she knew, he was already planning his revenge. The war was far from over. But whatever came next, they would face it together, as it was always meant to be. The exile was a lie. Seraphina knew it the moment she watched Vane walk out of the council hall. There was something in his posture, something in the set of his shoulders and the rhythm of his stride that spoke of a man executing a plan rather than accepting defeat. She had spent her entire life reading people, learning to see beneath the masks they wore, to understand the truth behind their words and actions. It was a survival skill, developed over years of hiding what she was, of navigating a world that would have used and discarded her if it knew her true nature. And everything about Vane screamed deception. His acceptance had been too quick, too clean. A man who had spent decades building an empire of power and influence, who had murdered and manipulated to achieve his goals, would not simply walk away because a council told him to. He would have contingencies, backup plans, weapons held in reserve for exactly this moment. She tried to warn them. In the chaos that followed the trial, as representatives from the various packs offered congratulations and pledged renewed support, she pulled Damien aside and told him what she had sensed. He is not finished. He accepted exile too easily. A man like that does not simply walk away from everything he has built. Damien listened with the focused attention he gave to all matters of strategy. His gray eyes studied her face, reading the conviction there. Behind him, the celebration continued, wolves exchanging handshakes and promises, the political machinery of the Pack Alliance grinding forward. But in this small bubble of space, there was only the 2 of them and the weight of her warning. "You are certain? I can feel it. The same way I felt him watching me at the masquerade. The same way I felt the attack coming before Victor appeared. He has something planned, something worse than what we have already seen." Damien was silent for a long moment. She could see him processing her words, weighing them against his own instincts, calculating probabilities and risks. "Then we will be ready." He gathered Lucian and a dozen of their most trusted wolves. They left the council hall within the hour, following the trail that Vane's convoy had left in the fresh snow. Seraphina wanted to go with them. Every instinct screamed that she should be there, that something terrible was approaching, and she needed to face it alongside the men who had become her pack. But Damien had been firm. "You are still recovering from what you did in the combat circle. The power you used, the way you pushed yourself. Your body needs time to heal." "I am fine." "You collapsed twice on the way back to the hall." Lucian's voice was gentle but unyielding. "We cannot protect you and hunt Vane at the same time. Stay here. Rest. We will finish this." She had argued, had threatened, had pleaded. But in the end, she had stayed, watching from the council hall as the Thornwood wolves disappeared into the winter forest. That had been 6 hours ago. Now she stood at the window of the chamber they had given her, watching the snowfall and feeling the wrongness growing in her chest like a tumor. Something was happening out there, something that pulled at the bond she had begun to form with Damien and Lucian, tugging at threads of connection that were not yet fully woven. Her father found her there as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mountain peaks visible through the window. "You should eat something." Marcus Aldridge carried a tray of food that Seraphina knew she would not touch. The tray held bread and cheese and slices of roasted meat, simple fare that would normally have appealed to her. But her stomach was knotted with anxiety, and the thought of eating made her feel ill. "You have not had anything since this morning." "I am not hungry." "You need to keep your strength up." Her father set the tray on a nearby table and came to stand beside her. "Whatever is happening out there, starving yourself will not help." Serafina turned from the window. Her father's face was etched with fresh worry, a different kind of fear than the one that had governed his life for so long. This was not the fear of exposure, of consequences. This was the simple terror of a parent watching his child walk into danger. "He is going to do something terrible." She spoke the words she had been thinking for hours. Vain. He let himself be exiled because he wanted them to follow him. He is leading them into a trap. Marcus went still, the look of a man who recognized truth when he heard it. "What makes you say that?" "I can feel it. The bond with Damien and Lucian. It is not complete, but it is there. And something is wrong. Something is very wrong." She pressed her hand against her chest, where the sensation of wrongness had settled like a stone. It is like a thread being pulled too tight, like something is about to break. Her father was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old memories and older pain. "Your mother had the same gift, the ability to sense danger through her connections. She called it the silver thread. She said it was how the Silverborn protected their mates, even across great distances. She never told me that. There was much she never told you, much that she hoped you would never need to know." He paused, his eyes distant. "She would have wanted you to trust your instincts. If you feel that Damien and Lucian are in danger, then they probably are." Serafina made her decision in that moment. The fear was still there, coiling in her belly like a living thing, but the pull of the bond was stronger, the knowledge that the men she loved were walking into darkness, and that she might be the only one who could save them. "I have to go to them." "You are in no condition to travel. The council healers said you need at least a week of rest before you attempt to use your power again." "Then I will go without my power, but I will not stay here while they walk into whatever Vane has planned." She was moving before her father could respond, grabbing the winter coat that hung by the door, searching for the boots she had removed hours earlier. Marcus caught her arm. "Serafina." His voice cracked on her name. "I cannot lose you, not after everything." She looked at her father, seeing the fear in his eyes, the same fear that had defined so much of his life, the same fear that had allowed Vane to hold power over their family for far too long. "You lost me the moment you stopped fighting." She spoke gently, but the words carried weight. "When Mother died, when Vane threatened me, you chose to hide. I understand why. I do not blame you, but I will not make the same choice." She pulled free of his grip and headed for the door. "If I do not come back, tell the council what we suspected. Tell them to send reinforcements to the Thornwood ancestral lands. That is where Vane will make his stand." "How do you know that?" "Because that is where he killed Alexander Thornwood, and he will want Damien to die in the same place his father did." She left the council hall at a run, ignoring the shouts of the guards who tried to stop her. A car was waiting in the courtyard, one of the vehicles the Thornwood delegation had brought. She did not know how to drive, but she knew someone who did. Elder Harrington stood beside the car, his expression unreadable. "I thought you might try something like this." He opened the driver's door and gestured for her to get in the passenger side. "I have known Vane for 40 years. He was never a man who accepted defeat gracefully. You believe me? I believe that you have gifts most of us do not understand. I believe that the Thornwood twins are walking into danger, and I believe that if anyone can help them, it is you." They drove through the night, the snow growing heavier as they climbed into the mountains. Harrington knew the roads, knew the shortcuts, knew exactly where the Thornwood ancestral lands were located. He also knew history. Alexander Thornwood bought this land 30 years ago. He built a lodge here, a place where the pack could gather away from the city. He used to hold summer retreats, training exercises, bonding ceremonies. His voice carried the weight of memory. The night he died, he was planning to announce his retirement. He was going to pass the alpha mantle to Damien and Lucian officially. He never got the chance. Vane killed him to prevent the succession? Vane killed him for many reasons. Power, ambition, the Silverborn research that Alexander had been conducting. But I think most of all he killed him because Alexander was everything Vane wanted to be and never could be. A true alpha, a leader who inspired loyalty rather than fear. The road grew rougher as they climbed. Serafina felt the pull in her chest intensifying, the silver thread her mother had spoken of drawing taut with urgency. "They are close." She gripped the door handle. "Something is happening." The car crested a ridge, and suddenly she could see it. The Thornwood Lodge, a massive structure of stone and timber nestled in a valley below. Surrounding it, scattered across the snow-covered meadow, were wolves. Dozens of them. Fighting. Harrington stopped the car. Even from this distance, they could see the battle unfolding, the black and gray forms of the Thornwood wolves clashing with the lighter-colored fighters who bore the mark of the Eastern Pack. Vane did not go quietly into exile. Harrington's voice was grim. He brought his war here. "I have to get down there. You will be killed. You have no training, no weapons. I have something better." Serafina opened the car door and stepped out into the snow. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but she barely noticed. All of her attention was focused on the bond, on the threads that connected her to Damien and Lucian, on finding them in the chaos below. She began to run. The slope was treacherous, covered in ice and loose rock hidden beneath the snow. She fell twice, scraped her hands, tore her coat on a protruding branch. But she kept moving, pulled forward by a force stronger than pain or exhaustion. The sounds of battle grew louder as she descended, snarls and howls and the terrible impact of bodies colliding. The smell of blood reached her nostrils, metallic and wrong against the clean winter air. She burst through a line of trees and found herself at the edge of the meadow. The fighting was everywhere. Wolves locked in combat, rolling across the snow in tangles of fur and teeth. Bodies lay scattered across the field, some moving, some terribly still. It was chaos, pure and overwhelming, and for a moment Serafina could not process what she was seeing. Then she felt them. Damien was to the north, near the lodge itself. His presence burned in her awareness like a beacon, bright with rage and determination. Lucian was to the south, moving fast, his energy spiking with each engagement. And beyond them both, at the center of the valley, she felt something else, something cold and calculated and utterly without remorse. Vane. She ran toward Damien's presence, dodging around fighting wolves, ducking beneath slashing claws. A rogue alpha lunged at her from the shadows, but before it could reach her, a massive gray wolf intercepted it, bearing it to the ground in a spray of snow and blood. The gray wolf was Lucian. He had sensed her approach and broken away from his own battle to protect her. He shifted to human form, naked and covered in wounds that were already healing. "What are you doing here?" His voice was harsh with fear and anger. "I told you to stay at the council hall." "Vane has a plan, something beyond this battle. I can feel it. We know. Damien has him cornered in the lodge. We are ending this tonight." "No." Serafina grabbed his arm. "You do not understand. He wants to be cornered. He wants Damien to come to him. This whole attack, it is a distraction." Lucian's expression shifted. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "The same place our father died." "Yes. Whatever Vane has planned, it happens there. You have to warn Damien." But Lucian was already shifting back to wolf form, already running toward the lodge with speed that no human could match. Serafina followed as best she could. The fighting around her seemed to slow as the Thornwood wolves gained the upper hand, but she barely noticed. All of her attention was focused on the lodge, on the dark windows and silent walls that held whatever trap Vane had prepared. She reached the building just as Damien emerged from the main entrance, dragging Vane by the throat. The old alpha was beaten. Blood streamed from wounds across his face and chest. His expensive suit was torn, revealing the pale skin beneath. He looked small somehow, diminished, all of his power and ambition reduced to this pathetic figure at Damien's mercy. But he was smiling. Serafina felt her blood turn to ice. "It ends here." Damien's voice carried across the silent meadow, the way it should have ended 10 years ago. "You murdered my father. You threatened those under my protection. You brought war to my territory. Kill me then." Vane's voice was surprisingly strong for a man in his position. "End it. Show everyone that you are just like me." Damien's grip tightened. For a long moment, Serafina thought he would do it. She could feel the rage burning inside him, the decade of grief and frustration demanding release. Then he loosened his hold. "No, you do not deserve a warrior's death. You will face the council again. You will be stripped of everything you have, and you will spend whatever remains of your life knowing that the world sees you for exactly what you are." He threw Vane to the ground and turned away. That was when Vane laughed. It was a terrible sound, full of triumph and madness and something else something that made every wolf in the meadow freeze in sudden terror. "You think this is over?" Vane pushed himself to his knees, his bloodied face twisted into a grin. This was never about winning. This was about making sure that if I could not have what I wanted, no one else would either. He reached into his ruined jacket and pulled out a small device, a trigger, a detonator. I have had 10 years to prepare for this moment, 10 years to plant charges throughout these lands. Enough explosives to level this entire valley. Damien spun around, but it was too late. Vane's thumb was already moving toward the button. If the Silverborn will not be mine, she will not be anyone's. The world seemed to slow. Seraphina saw the button descend beneath Vane's thumb, saw the flash of triumph in his eyes, the twisted satisfaction of a man who had chosen mutual destruction over defeat. Saw Damien and Lucian both diving toward her, trying to shield her with their bodies from what was coming. In that frozen moment, she understood everything. Vane had spent 10 years preparing for this. He had planted explosives throughout the valley, in the ground beneath their feet, in the trees that surrounded them, in the very lodge where Alexander Thornwood had once held gatherings of peace and celebration. He had turned this sacred place into a killing field, and he was prepared to die just to take them all with him. She thought of her mother, of the power that had passed down through generations of Silverborn, dormant for so long, waiting for the moment when it would be needed most. She thought of Damien and Lucian, of the bond that connected them, still incomplete but growing stronger every day, of the future they had barely begun to imagine together. She thought of the pack, the wolves who had accepted her, protected her, made her one of their own. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, bonded pairs and lone wolves, all of them about to die because of one man's hatred. No, the word was not spoken aloud. It was felt. A rejection of fate, a refusal to accept the ending that Vane had designed. And then something inside her broke open. The power rose without her calling it, without her consent. It erupted from the deepest part of her being, from the wellspring of ancient energy that connected her to something far older than the packs, far older than the wolves themselves. It was the power of the first bonds, the primal force that had given birth to their kind in ages beyond memory. Silver light blazed from her skin. It poured from her eyes, her mouth, her fingertips. It expanded outward in a wave that engulfed everything it touched, moving faster than thought, faster than flame, faster than the destruction that was already beginning to unfold. The explosions came. She heard them distantly, felt the shock waves rippling through the air. The ground heaved beneath her feet. The sky turned orange with fire. The world itself seemed to scream in agony as Vane's trap was sprung. But the light was there first. It wrapped around every Thornwood wolf like armor, creating shields of pure energy that absorbed the force of the blasts. It found each member of the pack, no matter where they stood, and enveloped them in protective radiance. The fire came. The destruction came. The valley shook with the fury of Vane's final revenge. But through it all, the silver light held. Seraphina poured everything she had into maintaining the shields. Every ounce of strength, every reserve of power, every fragment of will that remained in her exhausted body. She felt herself burning from the inside out, felt her consciousness beginning to fragment under the strain. The pain was beyond anything she had ever experienced. It was as if every cell in her body was being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. She could feel the life draining out of her, could feel herself becoming nothing more than a conduit for the power that flowed through her. But she did not stop, could not stop, would not stop until every wolf under her protection was safe. She saw through the light, saw the wolves huddled within their shields as fire raged around them, saw Damien and Lucian, their faces turned toward her, their mouths open in screams she could not hear. Saw Vane standing at the center of his own destruction, his expression shifting from triumph to confusion to horror as he realized what was happening. The shields held, and at the center of it all, Seraphina burned like a silver star. The explosions ended. The fire began to die. The echoes of destruction faded into silence. And finally, Seraphina let the light fade. She collapsed into darkness before she hit the ground. Damien caught her. He would remember that moment for the rest of his life. The way she felt in his arms, light as a child, her body completely still. The way the silver glow faded from her skin, leaving her pale and fragile in the flickering light of the fires that burned around them. For one terrible heartbeat, he thought she was dead. Then he felt her pulse, faint but steady beneath his fingers, and the relief that flooded through him was so intense it nearly drove him to his knees. "She saved us!" Lucian appeared at his side, his own face marked with shock and wonder. "All of us, the entire pack." Damien looked around the valley. The destruction was extensive. The lodge was gone, reduced to rubble and flame. The trees at the edge of the meadow had been flattened by the blasts. The ground itself was scarred and blackened. But the wolves were standing. Confused, disoriented, many of them wounded from the battle that had preceded the explosions. But alive, every single one of them. Because of her. "And Vane?" Damien asked the question without looking away from Seraphina's face. Lucian was silent for a moment. Then he pointed toward a crater at the center of the valley. The old Alpha lay in the depression, his body broken and burned. He had been at the epicenter of his own trap, and unlike the Thornwood wolves, he had no Silverborn to protect him. Vane was dead, killed by the very weapon he had designed to destroy his enemies. It was over. Damien carried Seraphina back to the city. He refused to let anyone else touch her, refused to rest, refused to acknowledge his own wounds until she was safely in bed in the penthouse. The pack healers came and went. They checked her vitals, administered fluids, spoke in hushed voices about unprecedented power expenditure and the limits of Silverborn physiology. No one knew if she would wake up. Damien did not leave her side. Lucian joined him, and together they kept vigil through the long hours of the night and into the gray dawn. They talked in low voices about everything and nothing, about their father and his dreams for the pack, about their mother and her quiet strength, about the future that now stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility, and about the woman who lay between them, the woman who had changed everything. She woke on the 4th morning after the battle. Damien was half asleep in the chair beside her bed when he felt her stir. His eyes snapped open, and he found her looking at him, her amber gaze clear and aware. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed." She smiled, and the sight of it made his heart clench with an emotion he could not name. "Is everyone all right?" Her voice was hoarse from disuse. "The pack? Everyone is fine because of you." She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she had drifted back into sleep. But then she spoke again. "Vane? Dead." "Good." There was no remorse in her voice, no regret. Just the simple satisfaction of knowing that the threat was ended, that the man who had haunted her family and his was finally gone. Lucian entered the room, and when he saw that she was awake, his face transformed with relief. He crossed to the bed and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "You scared us." "I scared myself." She looked from one brother to the other. "I did not know I could do that. Create shields, protect so many people at once. Neither did we." Damien leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The Silverborn legends speak of such power, but no one has witnessed it in living memory. What you did was unprecedented. It almost killed me." "Yes." She was silent for a moment, processing this. Then she said something that surprised both of them. It was worth it. 2 weeks passed. Seraphina recovered slowly, her strength returning in increments that felt agonizingly small. But she was patient in a way she had never been before. Something had changed inside her during that moment in the valley, some fundamental shift in her understanding of who she was and what she was capable of. She had faced death, had poured herself out completely in service of the pack, and she had survived. Now she understood, truly understood, what it meant to belong. The bonding ceremony took place on the night of the full moon. They gathered at a sacred site in the mountains, a circle of ancient stones that had witnessed such rituals for thousands of years. The stones themselves were massive, taller than any wolf in human form, carved with symbols whose meaning had been lost to time. Some said they had been placed by the first wolves, the ancestors who had learned to walk between human and animal forms in ages beyond counting. The surviving members of the Thornwood pack attended as witnesses, along with Elder Harrington and representatives from the allied packs. They stood in a ring around the stones, their faces solemn in the moonlight, their breath misting in the cold mountain air. Marcus Aldridge was there too. He stood at the edge of the circle, his expression a mixture of pride and grief. Pride for what his daughter had become, grief for the wife who should have been there to see it. He had told Seraphina earlier that her mother had dreamed of this day, had hoped that her daughter would find mates worthy of her power and her heart. "I think she would have approved," he had said. "I think she would have seen what I see now, a woman who has become everything she was meant to be." Seraphina wore a dress of silver and white. the traditional colors of a bonding ceremony. The fabric caught the moonlight and seemed to glow with an inner radiance, as if some trace of her silver-born power had woven itself into the threads. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her feet were bare against the cold stone. She could feel the power of the place humming through her, ancient energy responding to the ancient ritual that was about to unfold. It was the same power she had called upon in the valley, but gentler now, more controlled. It recognized what was about to happen and approved. Damien and Lucian stood waiting for her at the center of the circle. They wore the formal black of Thornwood Alphas, but they had removed their jackets and rolled up their sleeves, exposing the skin where the bonding marks would be made. Elder Harrington spoke the ritual words. "We gather tonight to witness a bonding, not the bonding of two souls, as tradition dictates, but of three. This is unusual. Some would say unprecedented. But the law of the pacts has always recognized that true bonds cannot be dictated by convention. They can only be acknowledged." He turned to Seraphina. "Do you come to this circle of your own will, prepared to accept the marks of these alphas and offer your mark in return?" "I do." He turned to Damien. "Do you come to this circle prepared to claim this Omega as your mate, to protect her, to honor her, to share with her and your brother all that you are and all that you possess?" "I do." He turned to Lucian. "And you? Do you come prepared to make the same commitment, to join with your brother and this woman in a bond that cannot be broken?" "I do." "Then let the bonding begin." Damien moved first. He stepped close to Seraphina, his hands finding her waist, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "From the moment I saw you across that ballroom, I knew you were meant to be ours." He spoke quietly, his words for her alone. "I did not understand it then. I do now. You are the missing piece, the completion we have been searching for our entire lives." He lowered his head to the left side of her neck. She felt his lips brush her skin, felt the sharpness of his teeth as they extended. The bite was quick and clean. Pain flared, then faded, replaced by a warmth that spread through her entire body. She felt the bond snap into place, a connection so deep and complete that she could suddenly feel Damien's emotions as clearly as her own. Love, devotion, certainty. Lucian stepped forward next. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized she was shedding. "You saved us, not just in the valley. Every day since we met, you have saved us from becoming the cold and broken men we were turning into." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I do not have pretty words like my brother. I only have this truth. I love you. I will always love you. Whatever comes, I am yours." His bite came on the right side of her neck, a mirror of his brother's mark. The bond doubled, intensified, until she could feel both of them inside her. Two presences that were distinct yet harmonious, like notes in a chord. Now it was her turn. Seraphina reached for Damien first. She pulled him close and rose on her toes to reach his neck. The bite was instinctive, guided by something older than conscious thought. She felt his blood on her tongue, felt the bond solidify into something permanent and unbreakable. Then Lucian. The same ritual, the same exchange of blood and promise. When she pulled back, both brothers bore her marks, visible declarations of what they now shared. Elder Harrington's voice rang out across the circle. "The bond is complete. These three are now one pack, one family, one soul in three bodies. Let no one challenge what has been joined tonight." The witnesses erupted in howls of celebration. Wolves shifted and ran in joyful circles around the stone circle, their voices rising to the moon in ancient recognition of a sacred moment. But Seraphina barely noticed. She was lost in the sensation of the bond, in the overwhelming rightness of being connected to these two men who had become her entire world. Damien pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Then Lucian did the same. And standing there between them, surrounded by the pack that had become her family, Seraphina finally understood what it meant to come home. 6 months later. The penthouse was quiet in the early morning hours. Winter had given way to spring, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seraphina could see the city beginning to wake, lights flickering on in distant buildings as another day began. The world looked different from up here. The streets and buildings that had once seemed so imposing now appeared small, manageable, part of a larger pattern that she was only beginning to understand. She had lived in this city her entire life, but she had never truly seen it until now, until she had something to protect, someone to share it with. She stood on the balcony, a cup of tea warming her hands, and thought about how much had changed. The Thornwood pack was stronger than ever. The victory over Vane had cemented their position as the dominant power on the West Coast, and alphas who had once been neutral or even hostile were now seeking alliances. The political landscape had shifted dramatically in the wake of the battle. Old grudges set aside, new partnerships formed. Damien spent his days managing this new reality, navigating the complex web of relationships and obligations that came with their expanded influence. He had grown into the role of alpha in ways that would have made his father proud. The coldness that had once defined him had thawed, replaced by a warmth that few outside their inner circle ever saw. Lucian oversaw the expansion of their security network, building defenses that would ensure no threat could ever catch them unprepared again. He trained their wolves with the same intensity he had once trained Seraphina, pushing them to become the best versions of themselves. And Seraphina had found her own role. She had started teaching. Other Omegas came to her now, seeking guidance on how to develop their abilities, how to find strength in what society had told them was weakness. She showed them what she had learned, that being an Omega was not a limitation to overcome, but a gift to embrace. The Silverborn power had not faded after the battle. If anything, it had grown stronger, as if the massive expenditure had somehow opened channels that had previously been closed. She was still learning what she could do, still discovering new aspects of her abilities. But that was not the biggest change. The door to the balcony opened, and Damien stepped out. He was dressed for the office, his suit immaculate, his hair still slightly damp from the shower. But his tie was loose, and his feet were bare, small concessions to the early hour. "You are up early." "I could not sleep." He came to stand beside her, his arm wrapping around her waist with familiar ease. "Is something wrong?" "No, the opposite, actually." She turned to face him, and the movement made her robe shift, revealing the slight curve of her belly that had begun to show in recent weeks. "I went to the healer yesterday, while you were in meetings." Damien's expression shifted, alert, concerned. "And?" She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Twins, of course it is twins." For a moment he simply stared at her, processing the words. Then a smile broke across his face, transforming his features into something young and joyful. "Twins. It seems appropriate somehow." The door opened again, and Lucian appeared. He took one look at his brother's expression and knew immediately that something significant had happened. "What did I miss?" Damien grabbed him by the arm and pulled him into their embrace. "We are going to be fathers." Lucian looked at Seraphina, his eyes wide with wonder. "Truly?" "Twins." She smiled at the symmetry of it. "The healer says they are healthy, strong, due in the autumn." Lucian let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the morning sky. He lifted Seraphina off her feet and spun her around, then set her down and kissed her with all the passion he possessed. "This is the best day of my life. One of many to come." Damien pulled them both close. "Our father would have been proud." Seraphina leaned into the warmth of her mates, feeling the bond between them pulse with shared happiness. A year ago, she had been alone, hiding from what she was, running from a threat she did not fully understand. She had believed that her nature was a burden, that being a Silverborn Omega was a curse that would only bring pain. She had been so wrong. She thought of her mother, who had kept so many secrets to protect her, of her father, who had finally found the courage to tell the truth, of Alexander and Margaret Thornwood, who had loved each other so deeply that death itself could not fully separate them. She thought of Vane, consumed by his own hatred, destroyed by the trap he had set for others. And she thought of the future, the children she would raise with these two men, the pack they would lead together, the legacy they would build from the ashes of the old world. The sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. A new day was beginning. A new chapter was opening. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we face it together." "Always," Damien replied. "Together," Lucian agreed. The three of them stood on the balcony as morning broke over the city, bound by blood and choice, and a love that had proven stronger than any enemy. It had begun with a masquerade, a chance meeting across a crowded ballroom, two alpha twins and an omega who did not know what she was capable of. It had continued through fire and battle, through revelations and betrayals, through loss and triumph. And now it would go on, into the future, into the unknown. 3 hearts, 3 souls, 1 unbreakable bond. This was the legacy of the Thornwood. This was the blood of the Silverborn. This was forever. The end.